Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the SMRS webinar on employer brand ambassadors. Over the next sort of 30 minutes or so, I'm going to be taking you through the presentation deck, which will cover how we recruit, engage, support, and inspire your people to become advocates of your employer brand. At the end of the session, there'll be an opportunity for Q&A. You should all have access to the Q&A section so that you can ask questions as we go. And right at the end, we'll pull everything together and we'll answer some of those questions for you. Everything that we go through today will be recorded, so you'll have the opportunity to listen to this back again, and we'll share this with you. So there's no real need to make a huge amount of notes as we go. So to introduce myself, I'm Sarah Sturgess and I'll be hosting the webinar today. I also have two colleagues who are assisting me with the questions. So that's Mandy Thorndike and Jane Hughes. So when we get to the end of the session, they'll come in as well and help with the answering of those questions. Firstly, I just wanted to introduce SMRS. Some of you will be aware of who we are and what we do already, but we are an employer marketing agency. So we work with organisations to help them to develop their employer brands so that they can attract, motivate and keep the people that they want within their business. But also, one of the areas that we really focus on is storytelling and bringing to life people's employer brands through the use of ambassadors. And that's what we're here to focus on today. The structure of the webinar will take us through these different areas. So firstly, we'll have a brief recap around what an employer brand is, so that everybody is on the same page as to what we're talking about. I'll then talk to you about the definition of employer brand ambassadors, why they're important. We'll talk through some different ways of recruiting them and some of the ways that some organisations have already done this successfully. What we also will help you with is understanding how you can maintain momentum to keep those ambassadors engaged throughout. And then an option on creating an online platform, generating some content and measuring how all that's working for you. So first things first, an employer brand is what people think and feel about your organisation as a place of work. So you already have one. Whether you've thought about it and articulated it and told the story of who you are or not already, your employer brand will already exist. Lots and lots of people within your organisation will be talking about who you are and what you stand for. So why do employer brands matter? Ultimately, 75% of candidates research a firm's reputation and employer brand before they even apply. So it's really important that you consider what is being said about you online. 83% of employers say that their employer brand plays a big role in hiring talent. And also 70% of candidates will apply if a company actively manages their employer brand. So reputation really matters. It's increasingly found that salary is no longer the most important reason why people will take a job. There's many other things that would influence them, and reputation is one of them. So in terms of an employer brand ambassador, one of the things that's incredibly important at the moment is the culture and character of your organisation, your personality and what you stand for. The purpose of your organisation as well is critical to new employees. So an employer brand ambassador is someone who can help you to share it with the world, internally and externally. The way in which an employer brand ambassador might share could be through social media, through events, and that could be profiles or information on your career site, and pretty much anywhere else that your brand can be promoted. What's fantastic about employer brand ambassadors is that they give a more natural, authentic and organic approach to your story and share that in a far more believable way. And that's really important. The other thing that employer brand ambassadors can be used for is to really give people a taste of your business and to help tell your story. So through video content, for example, or sharing across social, if you engage people to help to tell that story, they can really bring it to life. And you can use all of the content that they help you create in your marketing materials, as well as using their own voice to talk on a level to other people who might want to come and join you. So what's important about engaging employer brand ambassadors? Well, the first thing is reach. We know that employee channels far outweigh the reach of your organisations. Every employee and their followers multiplied is far further, will reach far further than any organisational messages. The other thing as well is people will listen to other people. People buy people, not companies. And they trust what an employee says 3 times more likely than they would if you were saying it as the company. It's also important from a loyalty perspective, because if you trust people to be your advocates, they'll be prouder and they'll be more loyal to you as an organisation. And the more that they do this, the more they'll express it externally too. So here's some really interesting facts that we've pulled together from all different sources, things like Glassdoor, LinkedIn, and what you can find is that there's some really strong evidence if your business casing internally. So 49% of employees are already posting about their company on social channels. So if you can help them get that story right and share the things that are most realistic and most authentic about you as an organisation, it will really help. You can also obviously encourage more of that sharing. 561% is how much further a brand message reaches when shared by employees. There's 8 times more engagement with content if it's shared by employees. So those corporate messages are important, but if that's all that you share, it's not enough to keep people engaged. 90% is how much people trust other people, and they only trust corporate messages, 33%. So you can see the power of the ambassador population. And 54% of online job seekers read employee reviews. It's also really important for engagement. So 87% is how much less likely an engaged person is to leave. So using these stats, you can see that you can build a really strong business case for your organisation to invest in building a panel of brand ambassadors to help get that employer brand out there. What we wanted to share next were some examples of how we've helped to recruit and engage brand ambassadors for organisations, because one of the things that we've come up against a lot is how do you get these people involved? And who are they, and how can you use them to best effect? So I'm going to take you through a few examples. Within this first example, this is House of Fraser were a really early adopter of the brand ambassador programme. And one of the things that they did as part of their employer brand rollout was they ran a competition to get more ambassadors from across their organisation to take part in a photo shoot to help them to develop and position their employer brand. They promoted it to all people across the organisation in all different roles. And they aligned it to their employer brand idea of let's do the extraordinary. So they asked for people who did extraordinary things in and outside of work to tell their stories. The prize was obviously very encouraging. It was a personal shopper day, a makeover, and then they would be involved in the photo shoot and bespoke illustrations, as you can see here. There's a great video that I'm going to include when we share this, because I think it really brings to life how effective ambassadors can be and how aligned to your values and story they can be. They also ran, with regard to the red carpet launch event. So as soon as each of the ambassadors' personal videos were created, they shared those, and they made sure that they were positioned across all of the organisation, both internally and then when it came to advertising. And all of the employer brand channels showed these images and also the video content that was created. The next example, I'm going to go through the rest of them quite quickly. So the next example is for Deloitte. And one of the things that Deloitte do is they actually created an ambassador guide to use generated content. So to help people who were their ambassadors to develop their own videos, audio and photographs as well. They also had a really nice idea of tying in all of the hashtags so that all of the content could be collated together. Ideas needed to be planned out each month and topic guides were given to the ambassadors. The business links to the enhanced engagement and collaboration was really key for this and its success. All of the content was edited, repurposed into things like animations, short snippets of video content, and also stories about individuals. We also enhanced this with some professional filming as well. Keri Foods is quite a quirky organisation with regard to the fact that their employer brand involved lots and lots of examples of food which aligned into their different values. They also wanted to involve their people in this. So what they did was they created 3D mini models of the different ambassadors. There were 12 different ambassadors across the business who were selected because of the success stories that they'd created. Each of the little models then were photographed and they were put into the employer brand. And the way in which this operated was it enabled people across the business to link in with the mini people as well and use them for internal communications as well as external employer brand channels. B&Q also gathered people from across the business to shoot short videos and say why B&Q was a good home for them. This really aligned into their employer brand, and all of those videos were used to inspire more ambassadors to take part at the managers' conference. And this really created an engagement because people across the organisation could see that the ambassadors were involved in all of the shaping of the employer brand and the stories that were then taken out to the market. Similarly, with my dentist, one of the interesting things that they did is they actually launched a competition that aligned to each of their employer brand values. All of that content was gathered and tested so that it also reinforced the stories that were created. So not only were the values put out to all of the business, but they were tested and refined as well so that we knew that they were authentic. Each of the winners were created as avatars that then sat within the day in the life stories and across all of the communications. So you can see there's a lot of different ways to engage people. But also once you've got people involved right from the beginning, it might involve the video content, the photo shoots and their engagement with who you are as an organisation. But ultimately, it's really important that you can also maintain momentum. And one of the ways in which we do this is, firstly, here's some tips to take you through. So think about pinpointing and finding an engaging and more creative way to get hold of those ambassadors. That could be a competition. It could be something that you do as part of your natural reward and recognition program, or it could be a social campaign that you run throughout the business. There's plenty of different ways of doing it. Remember that your employer brand pillars and values are also things that you want people to be able to connect with. So try and help them understand what they are and connect into those stories. Then the experiences that they share will be far more in tune with the messages that you're trying to get out to the external market or to share internally as well. You can't expect people to naturally come up with topics and themes. You'll need to give ideas on that too, because what might happen is they might quite quickly run out of ideas of their own. But once you've developed your employer brand pillars, that could give you lots of content. You may have 4, 6 different pillars, and each of those could give ideas around the themes and content that you could share. The other thing is be really practical and give advice and guidance around what you want from people. If you want stories, if you want user-generated content, or if you actually want them to be involved in just sharing, make sure that you've communicated what you're looking for from those ambassadors, and it will help them be on point all of the time. An activity or content plan can be really helpful as well. And also, if you can create an employer brand hashtag or a suite of them, that can help people connect straight into your employer brand and make it nice and easy for social sharing. What's extremely valuable is to give feedback to your ambassadors. Let them know what's particularly interesting or inspiring about what they've done. It helps to motivate them, and it also helps them to know that the things that they're sharing are things that other people are interested in. You can also use your employer brand ambassadors to take part at events, or to also, if you're doing live chat forums, or you could even get them to do webinars. And that will help share content even further than just across the social channels. If you've got people in a particular function of the business, so IT, tech, it's great to get those ambassadors all together at any events that you're doing, if you're doing a hackathon or something like that. The other thing that I'm going to take you through now is a platform that we've developed at SMRS, which is basically an employer brand ambassador platform. And how this works is it allows you to draw people in to an online portal. I'll show you an example of it first. So you can create a fully branded hub. We've called ours Ambassador Central, but you can brand it anything you want. It could be in line with your particular employer brand, and it could be something that carries all of your branding, so that any of your ambassadors can be given a login and they can come into here, and through this portal we can then communicate and engage with them. Once they're in the platform, they can be segmented into various groups. So if you're a global organisation, you can separate people by the country from which they are working. Or if you're UK only, you can look at the specific business level, the level of role, or even if it's a niche audience and you want them to be able to communicate with each other, share information, it might be a women in tech audience, for example. Once people are in this portal, we can keep in touch with them and share lots and lots of information. Ask them lots of things too. So we can create a calendar of activities across the year, so we can ask them to take part in forums, blogs, to help them share content around news feeds, newsletters, quick polls, and also diaries. There's so many different tools that are available within this platform. So you can do a quick poll. Where you might use this is, for example, if you have an audience such as women in tech, what you might want to do is to ask them a quick question around their working day, what's motivating them, what projects they're working on. You can also ask them to live chat to other people within their group, or invite new people to encourage them to become ambassadors in the future. There's lots of different opportunities to run forums. You can also set participants tasks to do each day. So they might fill in a day in the life through a diary. And from that day in the life, you can then create content and repurpose it to share across your social channels. We also use a lot of these tools to survey employees, and also to run polls and share creative ideas. So if you were running a new creative campaign, you could test with your women in technology audience what they think to the visuals that you're using. Are they going to engage them, and get them to feedback on that? You can have up to 500 different people on one of the panels. So that means that you can have as many panels as you want. So you can get lots and lots of understanding around all of the different audiences that you might want to involve as your ambassadors. And this creates lots of subsections of ambassadors for you. So what else can you do? I think it's really important to set out how often you'd like employer brand ambassadors to share and act. So they need to be flexible, but you want them to keep trusting you and resulting in some loyalty there as well. Some organisations will give incentives. There might be micro rewards, or it might be around the volume of social sharing that they do, could be part of their actual roles. Make sure though that you're keeping activities live for people. Quite often you can get brand ambassadors who take part in the employer brand at the very beginning, but they're then not engaged over a 12-month content plan, so you might lose them. We get the question a lot as well around what if people leave? Well, the way in which we'd approach it is making sure that you've got lots of ambassadors who are involved so that you can keep adding new ambassadors. If people do leave, you've still got a steady flow of new people coming in. And I think the other thing as well is really give them a pat on the back for the work that they're doing for you. Look at overall engagement and how that's improved. Measure things like your Glassdoor rating. Look at the amount of people who are engaging with you on channels like LinkedIn, the traffic to your careers site, and also the impact that your employer brand ambassadors might be having on internal communications and engagement. Collating all of this information is really useful and helpful so that you can make sure that you keep those ambassadors in the business and involved in sharing what is great about our organisation as a place to work. It's really important, though, that we can keep content coming for social sharing. More and more content needs to be put out into the market, but not just by you as an organisation, by all of those ambassadors. Deloitte's a really nice example of this, because what they did was they set up a network of lead ambassadors from each area of their business. Their role was, the lead ambassador's role was then to work with the employees in that particular business area to help them to generate content for their social feeds. That content could be from short videos and photos to snappy quotes or longer stories. And it was often posted in raw format. So it might be filmed on their phone and sent into the talent attraction team for some editing. What we do is work closely with Deloitte to tap into this community and really maximise its potential through repurposing content, sharing it in more and more ways, and making sure it doesn't just sit in one place. If you do keep everything in one place, so either via a portal such as the one that I've shown you, or you can get a lot of places where you can keep social content all in one place, keep posing questions, keep getting people engaged, but also give people those guidelines around what content to produce, how to do it, and ensure that when you then post into your social channels, don't send the same thing out all the time. Keep rotating it, keep sending things to different channels, or set a time in the future for you to really push messages out there. One of the things that's really important to us as an organisation is to be able to measure success. So brand ambassadors can also act as a really good barometer for the success of your employer brand if you ask them the right questions. Through the panel that we've shown or through surveys, you can go out to those brand ambassadors and ask them lots of questions that will check in on your employer brand. How is it landing? How are people feeling about it? Some of the questions that you might ask them are around the company's goals and values. Also, whether they're connected with the values that you have as an organisation and how closely they align to their personal values. You can also check in around the company's vision, mission, purpose. If you launch a new business strategy, it could be a really good opportunity for you to align into that. And then also, you want to sense check with them around things like how successful are you being at pushing that employer brand out? Things like what 3 words would you use to describe your organisation could be made into really nice content. And then also, how likely are you to recommend the organisation as an employer to any friend or family members? These could all be really good pulse check questions that you ask people maybe quarterly, maybe 6 monthly or annually. If you also bring in a sliding scale as well, it can make these surveys very quick to respond for people. They can usually do this kind of survey in about 5 to 10 minutes. So it doesn't take a load of time for them. And you can tweak them according to what you're focusing on at that particular point too. So that brings us to the end of this section. What I'm going to do now is stop sharing and move to the Q&A section and see whether we have any questions. So one of the first questions that we've had here is what differentiates an organisational brand and employer brand? So the answer that I would give here is that an organisational brand is something that obviously you use when you would communicate who you are as a business, whether that's through product advertising, whether it's through business to business advertising. And the difference that I would say is that an employer brand is really when you branding yourself and communicating to people. So it's just a completely different strand, different audience. So employer branding, far more about people, employer to people marketing, whether they're candidates or internal colleagues. We've also been asked, what are some ways to go about recruiting employee brand ambassadors? Would we do cold emails and mass call to action? So the first thing that I would encourage is done here is to speak to your internal communications department or team about how they currently communicate with your employees. They might have lots of technology that you could use, that you could also use, which might be things like regular pulse surveys. They might have a communication that goes out every month, and you could then involve yourselves in helping to get content ready for that one too.
Can I just offer another point as well on that one, Sarah? It's Jane Hughes here. Just to follow up on something Sarah mentioned earlier on in the presentation, you often will already have people who are telling the story of what it's like to work for your organisation within their social channels. And one thing that you can actually do is use social listening tools such as Rival IQ to actually identify and then harness those existing influencers that you already have, and use that as a mechanism to actually get them on board and be part of what you're trying to achieve, rather than just working on their own behalf. So that's just one thing to worth considering as well.
Okay, thanks, Jane. We've also been asked, how do you make sure your employee ambassadors are able to communicate authentically? Because some of the example messages felt quite corporate. I can totally understand where you're coming from there, Phil. And one of the things that we try and do is to make sure that any content that's created is unscripted. So in effect, you're asking people questions, but you're not giving them the answers. And I think by doing it that way, you can get some really authentic content. There's a few examples of that I'll happily share when we share this recording with you as well. Some really nice, genuine ones there. Jen, would you like to select another question?
Unmute myself. I think one of the things I can see here is, how do you create motivation for ambassadors that are unpaid? My organisation has student ambassadors that are not paid for their position. And actually we find that that's probably the most common situation, that ambassadors aren't necessarily incentivised in our experience. So there are different ways. Obviously, I think Sarah's mentioned about making sure that you acknowledge the effort that's been put in by those ambassadors through some sort of recognition. One thing that we did when we were looking at the Deloitte strategy for keeping ambassadors engaged was looking at a little bit of a leaderboard, so bringing in a little bit of gamification. So rather than it being financial incentive, people were actually quite motivated to get to the top of the leaderboard based on the the content that they were generating within their part of the business, and how much of that content was being shared, and then how much of it was being sort of liked and responded to as well within social channels. So just bringing a little bit of fun into it can sometimes be as much of a motivator as sort of nominal reward.
Okay, so I'm going to pick another question here. Thank you, everybody. We've got lots to go at, which is fantastic. So a really interesting one. In our experience, is it always talent attraction that own the programme, or do we find other departments wish to be involved? Also, in terms of internal governance, which departments do you usually find wish to approve external employee comms? So that's a really interesting one, because I would highly encourage that you take the involvement of brand ambassadors beyond the talent attraction team, and get your internal comms, your marketing teams involved as well, because the content that gets created isn't only for external purposes. So I would highly recommend that you all work together. and you look at this as something that is important to the whole business, very much as you would an employer brand. So making sure that that from a governance perspective as well, you create those guidelines so that you know what is and what isn't acceptable for your particular organisation as well. Mandy, would you like to choose any questions to answer?
Yeah, there are a couple in there around how to start something like this in a smaller organisation. I think we've had lots of conversations with much smaller kind of tech companies over the last few months who don't have big corporate structures with internal, external comms departments and etc. But I think what works really well there is that this is basically comes back down to the interaction of human beings. So it is talking to people, it is encouraging people, it's word of mouth internally. And I think often sometimes it can be a lot easier to start within a smaller organisation because people are just a lot easier to reach. And you know, those kind of coffee machine conversations can go a long way. It doesn't have to be a formal corporate program. It can be something that's quite informal to start with, and you know, it can be sometimes easier to get momentum in a smaller organisation because you know each other much better than some chap that works down the corridor in IT who you've never seen before. So I think that kind of sense of community that naturally exists in those smaller organisations can really be a benefit to an ambassador programme.
Thank you, Mandy. We've had one of our favourite questions actually is what key metrics can we use to measure the impact of an employer brand? We actually did a piece of work that collated all of the different things that was being measured, and I think we got up to something like 40 different measurement criteria. So I don't have the name of whoever has asked that question, but we do have a list of all of those. So if you'd like to bob an email in afterwards, we'll happily share that with you. And you can see all of the different things. It was right through from time to hire, right up to engagement and measurement of pretty much everything in between. So happily share that at a later stage. Jane, would you like to select another?
Yeah, there's an interesting one here. How would you go about controlling content so there is no social backlash? And I think this is, you know, when we're looking at environments where there is the opportunity for people to contribute to a conversation without you being able to govern what they're saying, this is often a challenge for organisations when they look to potentially embrace channels like social and even channels like Glassdoor as well, whereas obviously where you've got your peer review opportunity. So I think in terms of controlling content so there is no social backlash, I think it goes back to, you know, the purpose of the storytelling that you're trying to create in the first place through your ambassador network and those guidelines that you offer to those ambassadors, so that, you know, fundamentally what you don't want is to actually be creating content that is particularly controversial. The other thing is to have mechanisms for how you respond to any comments. Now, we would advocate that comments are responded to and that there is a mechanism set up to enable that and some ownership of that within the business or with a third-party organisation if you work with an agency or a social media sort of partner anyway. It's a really difficult one. There is no way of controlling what someone will respond to. But I would say, you know, make sure that there is clear purpose and that you're not kind of setting out to antagonise or raise controversial issues within the content that you're distributing in the first place. So kind of don't poke the sleeping bear, so to speak.
Thank you. Someone's also said that they get a lot of feedback from their staff that they're too afraid to annoy their networks continually. So I think, you know, the question there I think is around how often would we change and rotate the base of ambassadors? I think this is a really interesting point, because when you develop an employer brand, if you choose, as some of the examples we've shown, where you've got sort of 12 key ambassadors, they're very much there for the creativity and the leadership of the employer brand. So they're there to feature on a lot of that key content. But that doesn't mean they're the only people who should be ambassadors for you. So right at the beginning, use those first, 10, 12 ambassadors to get them to engage more ambassadors across the business. Because really, you probably want to have as many as possible. In effect, your ideal scenario would be that every employee feels that they can be an ambassador of the organisation and it's not reliant on too few. If you have got sort of the lead ambassadors, though, I would say probably every 6 to 12 months is sufficient. And then you can develop your content plan to engage those ambassadors. And then once a year, once every 6 months, maybe rotate the whole scheme, go back out to people, share with them what's been successful over the last year and bring some more people in. Mandy, would you like to answer another? We'll just do a couple more if that's all right. We've just got a few left anyway. So, Mandy?
There's one here around employer brand versus EVP. I think this comes down to terminology and definitions, really. For us, the employee value proposition sits at the heart of the employer brand and provides the framework and structure for the employer brand to be kind of designed around. So absolutely, the employer brand hangs up from the EVP. So the process that we go through is we initially do research. This gives us the themes. From the themes, we look at attributes, and there we define and develop the EVP. And then we move into the stage we call Express, which is about bringing that EVP to life. And that for us is the employer brand.
Brilliant. Thank you. Again, if anyone wants any more information around that, we'll probably be running further webinars on employer branding as a process and helping to build business cases. So again, feel free to sign up for that. I'm going to take one last question. How do you create motivation for ambassadors that are unpaid? So this particular attendee has said that their organisation has student ambassadors that are not paid for their position. Now, this is an interesting one because I think you have to balance out the amount of work that you're asking for people to do as being part of the ambassador programme. So I guess the key thing that I would look at here is what's a realistic amount of time for the ambassadors to spend supporting you in this way if they're not being paid. Presumably they get time out of work to be involved in certain activities, if it's events, etc. So that would be one thing to think about. Are you asking too much of them? The other thing, though, would also be if they're not getting paid for their position, are there other incentives that you can offer them? And some of the incentives we've seen that are really successful don't have to be big. They might be micro rewards. So they might be sort of coffee with a friend, something like that. Or they could even be linked to your CSR policy. So it might be giving people an opportunity to take days to spend with charitable organisations as well. So really, I think it's about asking them, are you asking too much? And ultimately, what more could you be doing for them? And take it from there. So I'm going to close off the webinar now. Thank you very much to everyone who's attended. This is going to be a series of webinars that we'll be doing over the next year ahead, I guess. So please keep in contact with us and take a look at what we're doing as an agency. And I'm sure that there'll be ways that we can share more information with you in the future. So thank you. Thank you for attending. Enjoy the rest of your day.